Hey guys, today I've got something a bit different for you. I'll be using the wings of an old crashed Predator drone and turning it into an electric glider. And then of course some flight. So if you want to see this, turn into this, keep watching. So here's a close-up of the wings. What I'll need to do now is take the covering film off to see if any of the framework inside needs to be repaired. The covering film came off fairly easily, although it did leave some of the colour behind. Now to get rid of that, get yourself some 1000 grit or higher sandpaper and give it a frame a light rub. You want to take off as minimum amount possible because you don't want to alter the aerofoil shape. I've also decided to add some curved or blended wingtips to it. To do that, you glue a couple of pieces of balsa together, adding a trailing edge stock piece. That gives you a nice angle. Then you draw some curves on it, which will give you a guide for when you start shaping. And here's the wingtip roughly sanded. I used a carving knife just to roughly carve it, and then a bit of sandpaper around a pipe to get that sanded curve there. And that'll go in place roughly there. Now what you want to do is, at this stage, if you're putting wingtips on, you want to leave it a bit bigger so that when you actually glue it to the wing, you can sand it flush. Here's both winglets sanded to shape. Now all I've got to do is epoxy them onto the wingtips. And there you can see what it looks like once it's glued on and blended into the wing. The wing joiner that came with the plane wasn't strong enough for my liking, so what I'm going to do is cut in a space for a 14mm carbon fibre tube, and I'll use a 12mm carbon fibre tube as the wing spar. For the fuselage, I've got some 9mm balsa, joined with some triangular pieces for the corners, and that'll let me carve it to a nice round shape. For the tail of this plane, I'll be using a 14mm carbon fibre tube, which will be epoxied into this slot here. And you can see a rough marking there where the fuselage will be shaped to. Down the back I've put in the carbon fibre rod which will house the spar. The support tubes for the spar have been glued into the wing. Now I'll give you a quick look at how it's going to go together. All I have to do is slide the spar through there. Slide the wing on. And the other wing. Now when you're installing your housing tubes for your spar, you want to make sure you do it on a bit of an angle, and that'll just give your wings a nice bit of dihedral. Just a quick note, when you're filling in the panel for your cutout there, you want to use a bit of balsa. It's a bit thicker than the actual wing itself, that way you can sand it flush. And to mount the tail on, I've roughly scored the end of the carbon fibre tube with some rough sandpaper. I've used some 2-pack epoxy, putting a little bit of curve on the base of the tail, just to give it maximum surface area for gluing. I've gone ahead and started to shape the fuselage now. To do that, I just use a Stanley knife and something round with some sandpaper on it. And for the motor mount at the front, I've made that out of some 3mm thick aluminium. And of course I'm blending in the fuselage to match the spinner. Now the best thing to do for the control surfaces at the back is to get yourself some of this trailing edge stock, and you rule a line right down the middle. What that does is lets you mark the angle, which is of course what's going to give you a proper control movement for when it's hinged. If you use the method that I've used to make the fuselage, this triangular stock actually comes in handy to gauge the depth when you're carving it, as you'll get lines running along it, and as long as you sand them even, you'll know that the depth is even all the way around. So I've marked out the position of the canopy hatch. I've used one of these saws to cut the front, and I'll be using a Stanley knife on a 45-degree angle to score down this line here. And that way your hatch will be perfectly matching your fuselage. Now one advantage of cutting the hatch out at 45 degrees is that when you actually place it in, it naturally stays in place and doesn't want to move, so it makes for a nice secure hatch. And for the wing locator, I like to use a 3.5mm bullet plug that you find on a lot of the small motors. Put the male side in the wing, epoxy it in place, and then you can push it into the main fuselage side to make a hole there. Drill that out, epoxy the female side in there, and you've got a nice snug pin for your wing locator. And once the epoxy's set, you just slide it in like this. And it's nice and secure. To install the motor mount, I've cut a few pieces of this balsa and glued them in. I've also drawn a circle. That's going to give me a guide so I know how much to remove. What that will do is give a lip for this motor mount, the aluminium motor mount, to sit in place. Okay, I've got it all rounded out and shaped nicely. Also allowed a little bit of space there for the wires to stick out of the motor. Now when you go to glue this piece in, it's a good idea to drill a whole bunch of holes around it, and that'll give the epoxy something nice to grab onto. Just fit it in nicely like that. When you're installing the hinges, you want to make sure you've gotten yourself a hinge slot cutter kit. That's going to make it a lot easier to install hinges. What they basically do is take out an appropriate amount of balsa from in there, gives room for the hinge to go in, and also the epoxy so it doesn't squirt out. Gives you a nice flush finish. When you've got the control surface in, there's zero friction movement there. And the covering film job's done now. It's turned out really well. I've also installed the electronics, although they're not yet organised. The very last thing you have to do is make up the control rods. I'm trying to stay in close to you.
Yeah.
I'll come in for a landing.
Okay.
It's not going to come down. Oh, look at that. Looks like we got two wing halves here. And here are the wings. They are foam core balsa construction. Normally what you want to do is start from the back of the plane and go to the front. Now the motor can actually come straight apart. I'm getting ready to do the maiden vertical flight. Oh. If someone should push him now. Kick him in the butt.